Hello, I'm Simon Whistler, you're watching TopTenzNet, and in the video today we're looking at the top 10 afterlives of ancient civilizations. So just before we get started, I do want to say that this is one with some tricky pronunciations. If I do screw them up, I looked them up, I couldn't find them, or I just plain old screwed it up. If you want to have a go at me in the comments, go right ahead. So, what happens after we die? It's a question we've all probably pondered at least once in our life because it's one of life's greatest mysteries. And to be honest, it's probably going to stay that way until we leave this world ourselves. Throughout the history, different civilizations have also thought about what happens when someone dies. As varying cultures, they developed complex systems about what happens after we take our last breaths. While some of them are very different from each other, there are also a shocking amount of similarities between the afterlives of these cultures that were spread out all over the world. Number 10. The Mesopotamians. The Mesopotamia civilization was located in and around modern-day Iraq and is considered the cradle of civilization. The Mesopotamian afterlife was based on their creation of man story. Man was created by a deity named We-Ilu, who mixed clay and blood from a god together. God's blood made us part immortal, so when the body dies, it is buried and returns to clay. However, the immortal part remains on Earth as a spirit before traveling to the Underworld. In the Underworld, the soul passes through a demon-infested plane and then crosses the Kuba River with the assistance of a being called Selushi. They then have to get through the 7 gates of the Netherworld city with the permission of the gatekeeper, Biddu. Upon arrival in the Underworld, the immortal part of the person is judged by a court of deities and then given a place in the afterlife. Even in the afterlife, there is a social structure, and where someone is placed in the great city of dead depended on 2 factors. The first was based on their social stature when they were alive, and the second depended on how their body is taken care of after death. So in ancient Mesopotamia, you definitely wanted to treat your family nice while you were alive. Number 9. The Aztecs. The Aztec civilization emerged in the early 13th century in what is today modern Mexico. Their afterlife was different than many other cultures because where a soul ended up depended on how the person died, and it was not based on the way that the person had lived their life. The Aztec afterlife was split into 4 sections that were based on the 4 cardinal directions. In the east, there was an afterlife for women who died during childbirth. In that afterlife, they would help the sun emerge from the underworld. The people who died from diseases like leprosy or were killed by lightning or drowned went to the afterlife in the south. It was a beautiful place where there was plenty to eat and drink. In the north, the afterlife was called Mictlan, and it was for people who died naturally, such as from old age. They had 4 years to make it through 8 different levels of challenges. If they did, their soul would find peace on the 9th level. As for warriors who died in combat, their heaven was in the west. In Aztec culture, the sun was important, and at times the Aztecs thought it was possible that the sun would enter the underworld and never re-emerge. So when he died, he would go to help one of the gods in the west. Together, they would fight against the darkness to ensure that the sun would rise every day. They spend 4 years doing this, and then they return to Earth as a hummingbird. Number 8. The Maoris. The Maori people arrived in what is today New Zealand in waves of canoes between 1250 and 1300 AD. When someone dies in the Maori culture, their spirit goes as far as someone can walk in New Zealand, which is the tip of Cape Regina. There, their spirit slides down a tree and into the ocean and eventually rejoins its ancestors. Their afterlife consisted of at least 2 different realms, sometimes as high as 12. Each level was ruled over by one of their gods. How the Maoris lived didn't really affect which afterlife they went to, because the Maoris did not believe that spirits were punished for their behavior on Earth. The Maoris apparently weren't overly concerned with the afterlife. What they did worry about was that someone's spirit might not slide down the tree, and this could negatively affect the people who were living on the land. Number 7. The Celts. The Celts were first mentioned in texts about 2,500 years ago, and what we know about their early days comes from writings by other civilizations like the Greeks and the Romans. Because of that, it is highly debatable where the Celts' real roots are. Many people believe they originated in the British Isles, while others believe they migrated there from mainland Europe. Nevertheless, what we do know is that when the Celts migrated to what is today Ireland, they incorporated their religious beliefs with the inhabitants who already lived there. They believed that after death, their soul went to an afterlife called the Otherworld, which consisted of several different supernatural kingdoms. This included Tir na Nog, the land of the young, Mag Mael, the plain of honey, and Tir Tainigir, the promised land. However, all of the kingdoms were woven together like the way the scenes are meshed together in a dream, so they can be different kingdoms at the same time. Number 6. Native Americans. It is believed that the ancestors of the Native Americans migrated from Russia to modern-day Alaska about 12,000 years ago. They settled across South and North America, and by the time Europeans reached the Americas, there were 50 million inhabitants, 10 million living in the United States. Since there were so many people spread over such a big area of land, the tribes developed their own very unique cultures. North American tribes were generally divided into different cultural areas that had a different view on the afterlife. For the tribes of the plains, they believed in an afterlife called the Happy Hunting Grounds, where there was plenty of buffalo to hunt. The Pueblo Indians' afterlife was just a continuation of this one. They simply went to another town where they got to meet up with dead people that they knew in life. They also weren't punished for anything they did in the previous life because it was simply a continuation of that life. Similarly, the Omaha Indians of the Central Plains and the tribes of New England believed the afterlife was just a continuation of this one, and there was no reason to punish the person in the afterlife. Then there are the Cheyenne Indians of the Northern Plains who believed that the spirit had to find a trail where the footprints all pointed in the same direction. They would follow the trail to the Milky Way until they got to a camp of the dead which was in the stars, and there they were greeted by dead friends and relatives. Number 5. The Ancient Chinese. In the ancient Chinese afterlife, when someone died, messengers carried their soul to Cheng Hassans, who was the god of walls and moats. There the soul was judged, and if the person was virtuous, then they would go on to paradise. However, only people who were kings on earth got to experience true paradise. Other people went to a lower part of paradise, or they would be reincarnated. There was also an afterworld called the Yellow Spring. Evil souls could go there for a fixed amount of time, where they were punished for bad deeds. Once they have done their time, they are given the elixir of oblivion, and then they are reborn. Number 4. The Incans. The Incan Empire started in the 12th century in the Andean area of South America. Their empire spanned from Ecuador to central Chile with about 12 million inhabitants. Hakavida, the Incan term for the afterlife, was 3 horizontal levels. On top was Hanan Pacha, the upper world, which is where people who lived righteous lives went after they died. Next was Kepaca, which literally translates to this world. Finally, there was Ukupacha, which is the below world or the inner world. It's where people who weren't good enough to go to Hanapacha go to live. Unlike many other underworlds, Ukupacha isn't a place for punishment. Instead, it's associated with the feminine Earth Mother and the bones of the ancestors. Also, the Incans did not believe that the worlds were completely separated. Things like lightning were the upper world connecting with this world, while mountains reached from this world upwards. As for the gateway to the inner world, that was through holes and caves. Number 3. The Vikings. When a Viking warrior died, it was possible for him to go to Valhalla, which means the Hall of the Fallen. It is a great palace, and the roof is made of shields, and it's guarded by wolves and eagles. When a warrior gets there, he is welcomed by the god Odin, and they share a glass of mead, which is a sweet honey-based drink. In Valhalla, the fallen warriors eat freshly slaughtered boar, which is made whole again at the end of the evening. Also, there is unlimited meat. Yep, that's right, in Valhalla there is even an open bar, which possibly makes it the best afterlife ever. They also constantly battled each other. However, it was only for sport because they were training for their doomsday. When that happens, the warriors will exit the 540 doors of the hall to fight alongside Odin against Norse mythology's most infamous wolf Fenrir. When a brave warrior dies, it is said that happens because Odin needed to fight for him. So maybe not quite the best afterlife ever, but still, it's got an open bar. However, not every warrior made it to Valhalla. The warrior had to be an honorable person and they had to die in battle. This gave them strong motivation to give it their all in battles because they had no fear of death. They were going to a better place if they died. As for people who didn't die on the battlefield, there were different afterlives. For example, the Vikings were seafaring people, and if someone died at sea or drowned, they would go to the Hall of the Sea God. If someone wasn't honorable, they went to a hall that had woven snakes which spew rivers of venom. People who got sick, or Odin forbid, died of old age, had the worst afterlife. They went to a foggy place where they had to eat terrible food with the goddess Hel, who is decaying. Finally, there are warriors who weren't lucky enough to make it to Valhalla, which was supposedly half the soldiers. The other half went to a meadow or a field ruled by the goddess Freya. Life was more peaceful there than on Valhalla. They made art, told stories, and were companions to women who had died as maidens. Number 2. The Greeks and the Romans. The Greeks and the Romans share a very similar afterlife because Romans borrowed from the Greek system of gods. So for simplicity's sake, we're just going to look at the Greeks' afterlife. In Greek mythology, when someone dies, they go to the Underworld, which is deep within the earth. It's ruled by Hades and his queen Persephone. Hades is always looking for more souls, and there is always room for more. The soul's guide in the Underworld is Hermes, an Olympian god who is the son of Zeus. The guide is needed because the Underworld is surrounded by 5 rivers. To get to the underworld, a soul has to be ferried across one of these rivers, the River Styx, by the boatman Caro. This only happens if they had the fare required. The fare needed to be placed on the deceased people's lips by relatives. If someone doesn't have the fare, then they stay in limbo between the two worlds. On the other side of the river, there is a giant three-headed dog named Cerberus. He lets people in, but lets very few people leave. After entering the gates, there are 3 judges and the deceased tell their life stories. There are then 3 possible outcomes. The first is that they go to the fields of Asphodel, which is where most people go. It's a gloomy and grey place where souls wander around aimlessly, kind of like Seattle. The second is for the souls of heroes and the blessed dead, who went to Elysium, which was considered a paradise. On the other end of the spectrum from Elysium is the pit of Tartarus, which is located in the deepest part of the underworld. It also sounds like tartar sauce, so you probably know it's going to be good. It's the same place where the 12 Olympian gods held the Titans, the former rulers of the world. It's actually a miserable place that's dark and cloudy all of the time. There are even storms that sweep people up, and they can't touch the ground for at least a year. Number 1. The Egyptians. When people in ancient Egypt died, they believed that their soul, called a Ba, would return periodically to their body. That's why Egyptians mummified their remains. When the Ba left the body, it traveled through the afterlife and had to pass through several gates, all guarded by deities. Once they got through the gates, the Ba entered the Hall of the Two Truths. This hall is long and supported by columns. At the end of the hall is the god of the underworld, Osiris. Surrounding the Ba are 42 gods with names like Bonebreaker and Eater of Entrails. The Ba then must proclaim the sins they did not commit to the specific god. For example, the Ba has to turn to the god Fire Embracer and say, "O Fire Embracer who came from Karaha, I have not robbed." And the Ba would go on and do a specific sin for a specific god. One of the worries for the ancient Egyptians was knowing what sin was associated with what god. Also, they needed to know what sins they couldn't commit. So, scrolls called the Book of the Dead were developed as a guide to the afterlife. What's interesting is that there was no standard Book of the Dead, and often variations were quite drastic. After getting through the Hall of Two Truths, the Ba goes through another ceremony called the Weighing of the Heart. The ancient Egyptians believed that the heart was a record of the deceased person's life. The heart was put on a scale, and on the other scale was a feather from the goddess Maat, which was a symbol for truth and justice. If the feather was heavier than the heart, then the person wasn't virtuous, and they were fed to Amut, the devourer. If it balanced, they were taken to Osiris and welcomed into the afterlife called the Field of Reeds, where they were given a plot of land that they were expected to work. So, not exactly as awesome as Valhalla with its open bar. So I really hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below, and don't forget to subscribe for brand new videos just like this every day of the week. Also, over there on the right, some other videos that you might enjoy if you enjoyed this one, and thank you for watching.